Hello friends, I hope life is treating you kindly. I'm Lubomira and thank you for joining me today. Welcome to all my crafty friends, new and returning. It's always a pleasure to see you all. If you're new to my channel, stick around and take a look at some of my other videos. I love sharing my projects with you all, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to spend a few crafty moments with me. Please remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. By hitting that little bell, you'll get notified every time I post something new, and you won't miss out on any of the crafty goodness. In today's video, I'm sharing another postage themed card. These cards are so very popular, and there are a number of ways you can make them without actually having special dies. I'm excited to share this card with you, so let's get into the video. To create this card, I used Dollar Tree paper packs for the card base, a stencil, a die, a rub-on, and several of the stamp sets for the greetings and other elements of the card. To start, I cut 2 panels from white cardstock. For those of you who like measurements, I wrote them down on the top of each panel. I took about ½ an inch off of the top and bottom of the larger panel and a little bit more than 1¼ inches from the smaller one. Off camera, I die cut each side of the larger panel using the Dollar Tree scallop die. I made sure to place the die so that the flatter edge was aligned with the edge of my cardstock. I used low-tack tape to secure the die in place and then ran it through my machine. I repeated this process until all 4 sides were die cut. Next, I scored a border around the inner edge of the scallop panel. I placed the panel onto my scoreboard, making sure to press the edge into the corner of the board. And using my dollar doohickey, which I've been told is actually an embossing tool, I scored a line at the 1/4 inch mark. I started the line a little further towards the middle of the cardstock so that the score line wouldn't go directly to the edge. I rotated the panel, scoring each side until the lines met at the corners. Once I was done, I set the panel aside and worked on the flower for the front of my card. Rather than leave the image as is, I wanted to fill in the flower blossom so that it looked like a solid shape. To do this, I first ink blended a circle. I used a circle die to create a mask. The circle I chose was slightly smaller than the blossom, making the flower solid, but at the same time keeping the scalloped edge of the petals. For the ink blending, I used Distress Oxide inks in the colors Shaded Lilac, Wilted Violet, Villainous Potion, Picked Raspberry, Twisted Citron, and Rustic Wilderness. I didn't really use much of the Picked Raspberry as it got lost in the ink blending, but I decided to include it. I placed the mask over a piece of cardstock and ink blended the circle using my lightest color. Once I had the circle, I placed the stencil over the shape and secured it into place with some tape. I used the remainder of the purple colors to ink blend over the stencil, trying to keep the darkest parts in the middle of the flower. When I was done with the blossom, I moved on to the stem and the leaves, keeping most of the parts light, but adding a few areas of shading. Like the blossom, I wanted the stem to appear as if it was a single shape, so I went ahead and shifted the stencil a little so that I could fill in the gap in the stem. Later on, I connected the leaves using some masking tape. This part wasn't really necessary as I ended up cutting most of the stem in my final card. I moved on to the smaller panel I had made earlier. To add some texture, I used the Dollar Tree mini background stamps and stamped the text image in several random places using Versamark ink. I wasn't concerned with how clear the stamp came out. It was just a matter of getting ink down to add interest to the background. Next, I applied white embossing powder over the wet ink. Much like the stamping, I wasn't really looking for accuracy. I even went back and brushed some of the powder off using a dry paintbrush to give it a more of a faded look. When I was done, I heat set the powder with my heat tool. Now here comes the fun part. I took a few Distress Ink mini cubes in the colors Wilted Violet, Picked Raspberry, Peacock Feathers, and Mermaid Lagoon and smushed the pads onto a piece of plastic. Then I spritzed some water over the ink to get the ink moving. I also used a blow tool to interact some of the colors together. This is a great technique for a quick no-fuss background. I placed my panel facing down into the colors, allowing the ink to absorb. Now this panel isn't made of water paper, so it's not going to take too much water before it starts coming apart. I moved quickly and just let the colors absorb, pouncing over the panel over the surface to get different colors. After I was done, my panel was completely soaked, so I set it aside to dry. The color brought out the white embossing in the background because of its color-resistant qualities. During my crafting session, I had a bit of an intruder. I was setting up for some perfect pearl splatter when Bella decided that it would be a great time to interrupt. Needless to say, there was a delay before we got back on track. When she lost interest, I was able to add my perfect pearl splatter in the pearl and the gold finish. Since I wanted this to look more like a stamp, I found the word forever included in one of the rub-on transfers. I cut it out and applied it to my card panel. For a little variation, I placed the word vertically along one of the sides of my panel. I used the die machine method of applying the rub-on. However, it didn't work for me this time. But I think it was more my fault than the method. The paper was slightly damp, and I think the texture of the background may have made it hard to apply. I had to manually rub the letters, and after I did, the word transferred beautifully. Next, I stamped the greeting, Best Wishes, onto my panel. I placed the panel, along with my flower, which I had cut out earlier off camera, into my MISTI to get a better feel for the design and the positioning of the greeting. I removed the flower, prepped the area with an anti-static tool, and stamped the greeting in black pigment ink. Then I applied clear embossing powder over the wet ink and heat set it with my heat tool. No crafting session would be complete without a second interruption from a fur ball. This time it was Gizmo demanding attention. After knocking most of the things off my desk, he left to terrorize his mother in the next room. For those of you who are new, I have several fur babies. The youngest are just under a year. My husband and I rescued a cat that was abandoned by her owner when he was evicted. They just unfortunately threw her out on the street and I couldn't leave her. So I took her home, and a few weeks later she returned the favor by gifting us with 4 hurricanes of fluff that look nothing like her. My mother-in-law took one and the other 3 have taken over and claimed our house as their own. So these interruptions are pretty normal. I just don't necessarily share them all the time. Anywho, after he left, I added a postage themed stamp to the card using black pigment ink. Again, I wasn't looking for a clear stamp since postage stamps are rarely really clear on letters. Putting the card together was rather quick. I first added a piece of paper from the card pack to the card base using liquid glue. This paper was very lightweight, but it had a nice, almost velvety texture to it. I was careful to make sure to glue down the edges, otherwise I ran the risk of pulling and tearing it. Then I glued the scallop panel on top of that layer. Next, I applied foam tape to the back of my ink blended panel and placed foam squares on the back of my flower. I attached my flower to my watercolored panel, and then I trimmed the overhang with scissors and finally applied it to the card front. To complete my flower, I added some white dots to the center of it and highlights to its petals and leaves with a gel pen. I finished the card by adding some sequins for a little extra shine. And that's it for this card. This card had a lot of techniques that came together well. I don't do many mixed media cards, but this one was definitely a fun one. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, I am so happy that you stopped by for some crafting time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and please leave me those comments below. I so appreciate all you have to say. I hope you'll join me next time for another project. Until then, have an amazing week, and I hope life treats you kindly. Take care. Bye!